We are back in business with the One Piece official chapter reviews. At least for the content, for the chapters, I think warrant an official review. And this chapter, yeah. Oh yeah, it did. Because there was a lot more to break down in the minutia, in the underbelly of it all. And that's why I just, let's say, couldn't do one video on it last week. No. I actually do an official step-by-step, piece-by-piece breakdown. And of course, it's been a while, but we break it down with what? The story progression, the character components, and first and foremost, the pace and chapter structure. If you don't know, now you know. I do my reactions to the chapters on my Cole Requiem channel. We have anime reactions edited on my Cole-san YouTube channel, first done on my Patreon, and then we also have a channel, Cole Plus, for a lot of random reactions, for let's say news, funny memes, trailer reactions, and so on and so forth. So if you don't know, now you know. You can check out all those links in the box down below. Gotta put that PSA because people aren't aware that we do a lot of different content over here. We do a lot of different content. On that note, let's dive headfirst into this chapter, One Piece. There is more than you would think for this chapter. And first and foremost, we have the pace and chapter structure. So for this section of the video, it's normally the quickest because it is overall how the chapter itself was structured. How did the flow go? And for this chapter, we have the usual order flow where we have essentially 6 parts for this chapter. Number 1 is the areas around Agate Island where we focus on the Navy and Jay Garcia Saturn. Number 2 is on Agate Island with York and the whole situation. Number 3 is on top of the Sacred Holy Land. That situation where you have the Celestial Dragons panicking over the food. And then of course you have Garland and the Elders. Number 4 is back to the waters around Agate Island with Jay Garcia Saturn. Number 5 is Floating Punk Records with Edison, the fusion combination of Edison and other Vegapunks. And then number 6 is the Kamabaka Queendom with the Revolutionary Army. So when you compare Oda's chapter structure to other series and their chapter structures, a lot of times Oda cuts from part to part to part to part on a regular basis than other mangaka and other series. So when we have 6 parts here, that may seem like a lot, but it's actually around the average for Oda. Where Oda tends to have around 5 to 7 parts per chapter on average. I would say above 7 is more than average Oda, where almost every page is a new section to focus on. In Wano Country, there was a lot of that. Oh, there was a tremendous amount of that. And then there are other chapters, let's say for example though, 1045, where it's just focused on one particular thing. So when it comes to pace and structure, I would say for this chapter, it's okay. It's the average what Oda normally does. Now for character, we have 3 people. The vast majority of the bulk here is for Saturn. Saturn gets a lot of reveals and then bites the dust. So for character number 1, we have Saint Saturn. Saturn was alive 200 years ago and looked the same as he does now. During the Kuma flashback in God Valley, chapter 1095, Saturn looked the same there, and that was 38 years ago in the past from where we are now in the story. We could have made the assumption that he had everlasting life, longevity from that chapter, but this chapter is the final nail in the coffin. No pun intended, given what's to come. But it is very likely now that all the elders do have a degree, at least, of everlasting life. Then this in turn is the point for Imu's character and abilities, since it seems like Imu is the primary source for their powers. Next for Saturn is that Saturn's nature as a scientist got the better of him when he saw the potential for the Iron Robot, Ameth, 200 years ago, likely even defying the orders of Imu to stop Ameth from being scrapped, so they could try and reap the benefits of its advanced technology. This in a roundabout way proving that Jay Garcia Saturn does not come from the era of the Void Century or before that. He was likely alive during the eras after the Void Century. In many ways, Saturn is like Dr. Vegapunk, though far less accomplished since he had centuries to improve the science of the world government, and compared to Vegapunk, he hasn't done much at all. In fact, you can argue compared to many modern day scientists like Queen, like Judge, and like Caesar, he hasn't accomplished much compared to them. After all that, Saturn's invisible eye attack, what I call the Omega Beam, is strong enough to critically wound an unguarded Vice Admiral like Doberman. Bonnie and Sanji could handle the attack in chapter 1095, and Luffy didn't have any qualms at all in Gear 5 in chapter 1107. But it's good to know the threshold of what can and cannot handle the Omega Beam of Saint Saturn, I suppose. After that, it's revealed that Jay's powers are connected to Imu itself, so much so that once Imu removes those powers, he begins to turn to a skeleton and dies. It's not clear the exact extent what powers Imu grants Saturn, but since Saturn has died when he couldn't before, that would mean that it's very likely that Saturn's immortality factor was granted to him by Imu. It is also very likely that his ability, the Gyuki, is also tied to Imu's powers, since when they were revealed in chapter 1110, there was no Delphrute name disclosed by Oda in that chapter in Planetfall. There was no Delphrute name disclosed, only the Gyuki in chapter 1110. Furthermore, in this chapter, when we see the panel of the black bolts of lightning around the marine ship, these bolts do seem familiar to the ones that we saw in chapter 1109 and 1110. The thick paintbrush style bolts that were used for the summoning to summon the other elders, and there's also an explosion around the ship when Saturn is starting to die, which is similar to what we saw in chapter 1094 when Saturn first touched down on Agate Island, where there was an explosion, fire, and also these thicker paintbrush style black lightning bolts. It is possible for sure that these bolts are hockey related in some way, and if that's the case, then it could be signs of Jay trying to fight back and avoid his death from the Great Imu. Or it could be Imu's also removing Jay's haki along with the compendium of his powers. And I say compendium because in that panel where the last animals are blown back, we do see the sort of smiles in the shadows. So I could indicate that Jay has multiple powers, where the Omega Beam plus, let's say, his Venom Bombs could be different powers from other things that form the Gyuki. So we're not too sure here. But the idea is that his haki could also be given to him by Imu, at least his strong haki. And then since Jay has failed the Great Imu, Imu is now removing everything that includes the haki. That is a crazy thought, but it is possible until it's not possible. After that, we have two more characters. Imu. Imu gets a pretty hefty amount of character stuff too. Imu will give orders to the people, probably telepathically, I'm assuming, without notifying its elders, assuming that Imu is the one to give orders to Garling. So this means that Imu at times can be more independent, way more so than what we first thought. But it probably applies to those that are aware of Imu's existence in the first place. A random celestial dragon, or let's say even noble, wouldn't, let's say, want to serve Imu if they are unaware of Imu's existence and they still view the elders to be the highest authority in the world. And Garling, I assumed, already was aware of Imu's existence. That's why he strutted into the room. I got orders, not from you guys, of course, but from something beyond you guys, Imu. After that, in Imu's mind, Jay had to be killed since Jay failed to capture/kill Joy Boy. I think implying, insinuating very strongly that its biggest issue with Jay, with his failed operation, was not the other things, but it was the fact that Luffy is related to Joy Boy, or it felt Joy Boy's haki, and Joy Boy/Luffy escaped. That is the penultimate issue. So it doesn't matter if they got the Mother Flame, or York, or other assets from Agate Island, Saturn let Joy Boy escape. That is the crime punishable by death. And the primary reason for that we see in chapter 1122. There is a rage, but more importantly, there is a fear. There is a fear that Imu has for Joy Boy, where just feeling Joy Boy's haki caused Imu to collapse, huffing, sweating, uttering the name Joy Boy in fear. If Imu fears Joy Boy and rage for anything that's related to Joy Boy, then this does, I think, put into perspective a lot of Imu's actions and reasonings, or lack thereof. Like, for example, in the past, the first iteration of the world government, Imu itself likely, they tried to erase the existence of the Nika ability by hiding it and calling it the Gum Gum Fruit. Something that the elders were in the dark about, stated in chapter 1037, but later on found out in chapter 1041 when Guernica's mission changed from getting Nico Robin to eliminating Straw Hat Luffy. The elders found out something that they were not previously told before. It's very likely that Imu knew about that, but Imu wanted to keep things in the dark because Imu has a fear, a PTSD for Joy Boy. So this does create an acceptable level of irrationality in Emu's operations because of this fear. So that is number 2 for character. Number 3 is Figureland Garling. Simply put, aura. That's it. That's it. So for character, I would say this chapter, obviously, clearly, the lion's share goes to Saturn and Emu. And it is very intriguing stuff across the board. Getting more about Emu is getting more about the late stage of the story. Pivotal stuff, because moving forward, with all things that they acquired, the world government is going to be way more active as adversaries in like the grand scheme of things. Less enough for the Stryads at this point in time, but they will be, of course, more active adversaries, for damn sure. And now this brings on the story progression components for this chapter. Now, number 1, the cover story. Odin Castle is being rebuilt in Kuri. I just hope that Oda does not put Yamato in that castle and we don't see her for another like 5 arcs. No. I want Yamato to join the crew. That was the right decision to do at the end of Wano Country, but Oda chose to do the wrong decision. So I just don't want to see Yamato get shafted more and more and more. I do not want to see that. So maybe like Kinemon at Sabo goes in there, who knows? But either way, Minatomo has vanished from the construction site. So see how that plays out in the next cover stories to come. After that, Rob Lucci, aka Rob Bababucci, aka Rob Enrico Pucci, in the official version says that he killed Stussy, which is very different than the scan version where he says she was killed in action. So Lucci did finger pistol Stussy in chapter 1091, and that was the last time he saw her when she was protecting Dr. Vegapunk. So he could believe that she did die from that, but I have my doubts. My guess here is that maybe Kaku told him something to make him believe that she did die, or maybe he's keeping face and Kaku told him the truth. And even though Rob Lucci is not known for being very sympathetic, maybe here is one time, maybe he is. But considering how he almost killed Stussy immediately when she was revealed to be a traitor, I have my doubts. After that, the person in the Holy Land that protected the giant Ameth, the Iron Giant, from its demise was Saturn himself over 200 years ago. Likely in the process, he went against the orders of the elders and Emu himself. This is a very ironic twist of fate in a similar way with his experiments on Bonnie, revealed in chapter 1103. Celestial dragons are known to feed some of their slaves powers to perform more unique tortures and entertainment on these slaves. And Saturn did experiment on Bonnie when she was a baby, an infant, to test if devil fruit extracts would work on an infant. They can't consume the fruit, obviously, at that age, but could the extract work? And it did work. And so in a similar way to how his scientific curiosity worked against him via meth, the same thing was the case, obviously, with Bonnie. Later, he has his powers removed by Emu and is killed in a, what you would call a dereliction of duty. Emu in the official version says, and I quote, "Saturn, why did you allow Joy Boy to escape?" Meaning anything involving Joy Boy must be erased from the world, and Jay allowed Luffy / Joy Boy in his mind to escape. Even though they had attained Mother Flame and York, it doesn't matter because it doesn't offset anything that is favorable towards Joy Boy. This is what Emu thinks, and Emu is the one calling the shots. Now, while Saturn dies, and when he does die, we see his body mummify and then become a skeleton. This could imply that Saturn's true form from the beginning was a skeleton, similar to Brook, which would involve in some way the soul, where the soul on the way to hell or from hell gets resurrected, restore the Emu's powers, and then they come back to life. So that could be one option, or let's say it could be another option where it's time related. The normal time flow that someone would go through in their lifetime is now allowed to affect Jay Garcia Saturn now that Emu's powers are being removed from Jay. Hence why Jay starts to mummify and then becomes a skeleton. There are other options as well, obviously, but those are like two of some of the better ones, I think. When it comes to like the actual inner workings, the minutia of how it would work, like why he mummified and then turned into a skeleton. Now, next part here, Edison. Edison had the cloud plant overproduce a large amount of island clouds to make punk records float away on a roaming cloud. York was able to shoot a beam rifle of some kind at the lab, so only the top part, the Punk Records part, could float on a roaming cloud away. Now, the roaming cloud sounds very familiar to you, at least it should, because it sounds very similar to cloud drifting, mentioned in chapter 242, when a criminal is sentenced and placed on a small deserted island cloud indefinitely, to drift indefinitely. This is why the random ship before Jaya almost hit the Strat crew in chapter 218. And so it looks like Edison and the Vegapunks have made a similar type of cloud here. Now, it is not clear how Edison survived going through the lab barrier in chapter 1112 and then falling to lower levels, and then afterwards telling Stussy 4 chapters later to live, but apparently he did. In chapter 1118, York says that the last 2 Vegapunks alive are Alice and Lilith, but Edison was also still alive and she was unaware of that. So it looks like he at some point disconnected from Punk Records, either willingly or unknowingly because of his stunt in chapter 1112. But that's how he went about unnoticed by York, and at some point went back up to the lab stratum and then had his parts changed out. So I'm not a big fan of how Oda did that, because it's a lot of like conjecture on my part. I have to kind of assume various things happen for this to go down. But the end result here is obviously a big blow to the world government, where they do not have any access now to Punk Records, at least physically. York can still access that, but in the near future, they could maybe find a way to block her signal, or even, let's say, tweak it, manipulate it in the future. That's possible. They are Vegapunks. But again, I'll say for the record, I'm not a big fan of how Oda handled the Edison thing. Now, later on, we do see Edison talking to other Vegapunks when he's changing out his parts, and he's like combined in some sort of homunculus from FMA. He's combined with Shaka, Pythagoras, and Alice. The York parts will be thrown out, which is like tragic. That is tragic. That's a tragedy. Lulusia Kingdom's destruction, York's body parts being thrown out. It shakes the soul, it does. Though keep in mind that a lot of these replacement parts aren't mechanical. You can argue they're actually flesh and blood, because we found out in chapter 1075 that they can recreate organs with organoids. So whether it's Shaka or Lilith or York, the ones I'm assuming that are more flesh and blood, the same for, let's say, parts of Alice, they could actually have their organs completely remade via organoids. In the process, he does contact with Aria, which is an island that Nami went to for her time skip training. They are also scientists that specifically study the weather all across the world, stated in chapter 596. It's an artificial sky island that sometimes descends and ascends depending on the flow of the wind. And when they descend in the process, they do go and gather materials as well for their experiments. They are the first place we also saw the knots that are used to store wind or weather, or in some cases you can argue energy, shown in chapter 523, what a meth used to unlock Joy Boy's hockey. Vegapunks, they may have actually seen that, and they're going to Witharia for vital information, and or Witharia is going to assist them in maintaining or utilizing Punk Records in some way. Let's say the One Piece World's version of a satellite, right? So there are options here that are coming for Witharia and Punk Records, some big ones for sure. Next for story is this: the Holy Land. It looks like Dragon, Sabo, and the Rev's plans for the Holy Land are set in motion. They are coming to fruition. One of the missions that Sabo stated he had in chapter 1083 was destroying the food stockpile in the Holy Land. And in that very same chapter, Dragon mentions that the 7 remaining kingdoms that had revolted stopped exporting their natural resources. Furthermore, Ivanko follows up by saying their revolutionaries have been attacking world government cargo ships all around the world. So not only were their original stock reserves destroyed by Sabo for their food, but also their supply lines have been greatly damaged, dwindled, potentially cut off entirely. So the Rev have been doing consecutive gut blows, Ippo liver blows to the world government and to the celestial dragons by causing an uproar because their food supplies are dwindling dramatically. However, a dramatic, undeniable change has happened in the Holy Land, unbeknownst to I think most people is Saint Figureland Garling. He has become the new godhead of science and defense. Jay has been relieved of his duties, terminated, and Garling's position from chapter 1086 has elevated dramatically, though he still might be the supreme commander of the Holy Knights, because he is only the new godhead of science and defense because York is under his direct orders and purview. So all the science, you'd argue, would just go to her, and all the defense will be all of Garling's jurisdiction. Garling in chapter 1086, nor in the Kuma flashback in the God Valley section, we have never seen Garling care one iota about science. Garling seems to be a warrior, first and foremost. He's a warrior. Defense is still going to be his main thing, and him still having command of the Holy Knights is still going to be important for the defense of the Holy Land and all their operations. And then finally, during the Rev meeting, they realize the advantaged position that the Holy Land is in while the world is sinking. And Eva also reveals that there's more of these titanic bridges across the entire world, similar to the East Blues Tequila Wolf. There's also Rum Wolf, Bourbon Wolf, and Vodka Wolf, likely each one in a major blue of the world, north, south, and west. Legend says that Hennessy Wolf was in the New World, but 400 years ago, Ryoma cut it down. So, it's in the DNA. It's in the DNA, yeah. But Dragon realizes that Vegapunk's speech was going to cause a lot of turmoil around the world for land, particularly higher ground land. So he and the Rev must act now to resolve the primary issue, which is what? The Holy Land and the Celestial Dragons. So it seems like Dragon is going to act, and he's going to act now. And that's a major deal. Conclusion. Overall rating for this chapter of One Piece. I would say this chapter, again, in terms of pace, it's okay. Not the greatest at all. And when it comes to story progression, my biggest problem I have is the Edison thing, where the Edison thing is like, I can see how he got here, but I don't like how he got here. But at the end of the damn day, it's not necessarily a big deal compared to the positive components of this chapter. You have the Garling, you have the Saturn, you have the Emu, you have the Monkey D Dragon. There are too many strong things for this chapter, and they do go relatively deep. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna say this chapter is an 8.5 out of 10. This is a great plus chapter in my book. So Oda in the final saga has just continued to be him. He's continued to be the Goda. It's not perfect, but so far we are on point. And this chapter is an example that, yeah, we are on point. So let me know your stance on this chapter of One Piece. Once again, I will not be doing this for every chapter, only for chapters that I think warrant a actual robust, full review. This chapter I thought did, but in the future, not every chapter is going to warrant this. All right, keep that in mind. So until then, I'm gonna catch you guys on the flip side. Be easy, stay safe, have a nice one.
See you. Bye-bye.